Thank you, Senator Merkley, from coming to Eugene. I'm Bob Soda from Cottage Grove.
Bob, what number do you have?
357224?
Thanks, we'll retire it.
Okay, thank you. What is your opinion on the Oregon testing the water for implementing a carbon tax through the Oregon Innovation and Infrastructure Task Force? You know, carbon tax was rejected by the Congress, and I'm really concerned about the impact it's going to have on the economic impact it'll have on not just rich people, everybody would be involved in this because most prices would rise.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
You bet, you bet. Let me start from the perspective of saying that carbon pollution, I believe, is a very big deal, and that we have to work to address it. And that's going to involve conversations, activity at the local level, the state level, the national level, the international level. And I think one way of capturing this is the number 400. 400 is a very significant number in the future of the world. And can anyone tell me why?
Parts per million.
Parts per million of carbon pollution. Now, when we hit 350, folks said, you know what, we cannot allow this to keep going up, and we got to slow down our carbon pollution so that by the time we get to 400, we're coming back down again. Well, unfortunately, the opposite has happened. The rate of carbon pollution is escalating, such that 30 years ago it was 1 part per million per year on an average, and now it's 2 parts per million per year on an average. Now, if you think about before the Industrial Revolution, it was 270. It has been many, many millions of years since carbon level in the air was 400. And it changes the heat trapping properties. Now, some folks feel like this is some theoretical issue that may affect us 7 generations from now. And that is not the case. It is affecting us on the ground right here, and you can think of it in terms of what it's doing to fishing, and to farming, and to forestry. Starting with forestry, we have a big pine beetle infestation that is growing because there's not enough coal snap to kill off the beetles. That adds to the fire hazard. Then we have more lightning strikes because of the type of storms that are coming, because there's more humidity in the air coming in off the ocean. And those lightning strikes are hitting forests with a lower moisture content, and so they light up faster. So forests are affected. Or how about fishing? I just went over the Cascades yesterday, and the Cascades, when you're crossing Mount Hood, looked like it had about an inch on the side of the highway. And I came back over the Cascades, or not really, I back down towards Klamath, and then Falmouth Falls, and then Medford, and then around. Anyway, there's no snow. And the reservoir is low, really low. And if you have less snowpack, and there was a study recently in the paper about tracking the years of snowpack at Crater Lake, then the streams in the summer are smaller and warmer, which affects our fishing. And there's probably some fishermen here who could attest to that. Or how about over on the coast, where we're having trouble with the oyster seed, which are the baby oysters, and they're having trouble because they depend upon shell formation. The shell formation is being affected by carbonic acid in the ocean, which is the result of carbon dioxide being absorbed into the ocean. And that's just a harbinger of what can come as the acidity level rises. And then when we look at agriculture, down in the Klamath Basin, we had 3 worst ever droughts in 13 years. And the way it's going right now with the winter snowpack, we may have the next worst ever drought this coming year. And so it's very real. It's having a big impact. It's impacting things, it's not like Oregon is the epicenter. You can find these stories in every state. And so we have a responsibility as stewards of this planet to be engaged in this issue of carbon pollution. And that means here in America, we need to take on the pollution from buildings. And by the way, energy-saving retrofits can have a big impact on that. So a side benefit from employment and good stewardship on energy. Certainly, there's a lot we can do in transportation, both cars and trucks, and the whole process of down to bike lanes and mass transit. And the power generation. There was a letter or an op-ed today by Angus Duncan. And it was, I think the title was The End of Coal or something like that. Well, what he was pointing out is that coal plants are disappearing across America, and if we proceed with requiring the best available technology to reduce the carbon pollution, they'll disappear even faster, and that will have a significant impact. So we have to work in all of those areas. Now, at the federal level, there is no window at this point in regard to pursuing an externality strategy where you put a price on the pollution that goes with an activity. But there is that opportunity at the state level. I know you were standing up speaking, you're concerned about it. But I'm explaining to you why I think it's a very important conversation for every community to be having. Now, we have a lot of state legislators here who will be involved in that conversation, and this is probably a point to see if any of them want to speak to it.
Especially the economic impact part to the citizens.
The economic impact. Any takers? Okay, well, they will be having that conversation when they're in session, and in 2015. But the one reason I wanted to highlight the impact on fishing, farming, and forestry is the pollution itself has an impact as well. So an externality fee can have an impact. If those funds, there's also this strategy of fee and rebate, which is an interesting strategy where you don't raise revenue, but you change the incentives so that the money goes back into the economy and creates an equal amount of economic activity. There's also this strategy of using fees to help replace some with carbon-producing energy sources, replace some with renewable energy strategies that don't produce that carbon, and that can create an economic activity. So it's an interesting, complicated conversation. Important to bring concerns forward and wrestle with it, but that's why I think it's a conversation worth having.
Can I make a comment? My name is Pam Driscoll. I live in Dexter, and I'm really concerned about Biden's O&C bill, the forestry bill, for a lot of reasons. I've been working on climate change for the last 15 years, and from what I understand, we have about 2 to 3 years before runaway climate change is out of human control. And deforestation is the #2 reason for climate change. And it's so interesting that Governor Fitzhauer is working with Washington and California on this climate bill when he is promoting the clear cutting of 1.6 million acres, because he's talking out both sides of his mouth. So there's a lot of solutions to our economic problems that don't involve destroying our forests, which sequester carbon, that actually get paid for. There's the thinning of the forests, there's the timber harvest tax, which is much lower than California or Washington. There's just a lot of different things we could work on for our revenue. And I just wonder how you feel about this bill and in relation to climate change and our fish and our clean water and our economy.
So thank you. I've taken a lot of feedback on the bill, and in fact, I'm riding up here from the south. I was reading a series of memos that different people have written, laying out their concerns, their support, so on and so forth, and I'm trying to channel some of those key points into the conversation. I'm not on the Natural Resources Committee. I think it is a complicated story because we have a lot of second growth on BLM where trees are the same age, they are not good for biodiversity, because they're so small and so tightly packed, they are a hazard for fires, they cultivate more disease, and we have such a complicated patchwork that you go 300 yards from any forest piece and the forest is different. And so how you develop a plan that protects the most sensitive pieces and increases the health. And I think these lands did have a role in timber production in Oregon, and the public trees go to our mills, which produce lumber, whereas the private trees are being shipped overseas. So our mills are dependent upon logs from public lands. So my general sense has been that we have to protect the sensitive parts of the forest And the sustainable production of the rest has to actually be sustainable and has to help improve the forest health. And that's the type of balance I think would be appropriate, and I'm trying to wrestle with the nitty-gritty details and provide feedback within that framework. And it's not exactly what you wanted to hear, I know that.